Today's question comes to us from Virginia, and that question is, when looking for schools, how do you know what they need and are looking for in your recruiting class? This question immediately brings up one of the biggest recruiting myths that players are told from the time that they enter high school. And that myth is that coaches will recruit a starter at every position every 4 years. This simply isn't true. So for example, what players have been told is if you're a sophomore second baseman, that in order to find where scholarship money may be available or a roster spot might be available, that you need to go and find a sophomore second baseman in college. And this is just really a bad way to narrow down your search because it's simply not true. You have to consider that over the course of 8 years, a college program is much more likely to have 3 to 5 starting second basemen than they are to have 2 starting second basemen over an 8-year period. Now there's 4 different ways that we look at recruiting as far as 4 different steps in a recruiting process. And so let me walk you through this a little bit so that you understand how coaches recruit, the types of players that they're looking for in their recruiting classes, and how that might affect you as a softball recruit. The first class, or the first group that's recruited in each class, are your 5-tool players. Now, the truth about these 5-tool kids is that there's just not a lot of them out there. And so your SEC and your Pac-12 teams or your Big 12, Big 10, ACC type conferences that produce top 25 teams year in and year out, a lot of times they're lucky if they get 1 or 2 because there's just not a lot of numbers of those kids out there. And so these 5-tool kids are the kids that hit for average, hit for power. They play exceptional defense, they're well above average runners, and they have really good arm strength. This is also the group where we see the top pitchers in the country go as well. These are the kids that coaches invest heavily in, and they're really a safe bet, even as freshmen and sophomore, because they do so many things well that coaches can really rely on them to play a lot of different positions. They know if maybe the hitting tools don't pan out, that they've got a really good lockdown defender. They can put somebody behind the plate. If they've got a pitcher, maybe they don't have a number 1 pitcher, but maybe they've got somebody to throw the second half of a doubleheader, or to give somebody a different look in a second or third conference game over a weekend set. So the first group that goes are the 5-tool kids. Again, there's not a lot of those kids. These are the kids that you see recruited as freshmen and sophomore. Something else to consider, some of the verbiage that's used, is when coaches are talking about looking for athletes, and there's a lot of schools that say we're looking for athletes. This is really what they're looking for. They're looking for those 5-tool kids that do everything well because they really are a safe bet. And if something doesn't pan out with them, then they have so many different physical tools where it's likely that they're going to be able to contribute at some point. The second group is going to be your players that are not 5-tool kids, but they've got 3 or 4 tools that are really above average. And these are the kids that they watch just a little bit more, and that they might be missing 1 tool. For example, you might have a shortstop who can really run well, has a really good arm, and plays exceptional defense, but may hit for average, but not a lot of power. It's a really good kid to go after, and so they still invest in a lot of these kids. A lot of these kids are full ride type kids or 80 to 90% type kids, and they really are kids that have proven themselves. They go a little bit later, and so a kid like this at a major Division I level might go her sophomore year, might go early her junior year. That's not uncommon, and so you see those kids kind of funnel into that system. This is also the group where coaches will begin to specifically address needs for their team. They may look at their roster, they may look at the previous year's success or how they're doing this year, and they may determine that in this recruiting class, they've got a need for speed, pitching depth, power hitting, defense up the middle, defense in the outfield, and they'll really look to load up in those deficiencies because they've got to replenish what they're losing. And keep in mind that a coach's needs are going to really change on a weekly basis depending on how recruiting's going for them, how their team's doing. It's not uncommon at the end of the year for a coach to get a surprise that a player's transferring out. And so that goes back to identifying opportunity based on the old myth as being very inaccurate. The third group that goes are typically your kids that are your 1 or 2 really exceptional kids. In this third group, these are the kids that are really going to continue to address the coach's needs, whether it be speed or defense or power hitting or overall hitting or maybe a slapper. These are the kids that specialize in 1 or 2 things, and they do it exceptionally well. They're not going to command the money that a kid in the first group, which is the 5-tool group, or the second group, which is kids that are 3 or 4 tools well above average, they're not going to command that sort of money, but they can be expected to receive some money for those specific tools. Now, because their focus is very narrow on what they do, there is more risk there involved for the coach, and so that's why you'll see a little bit less money committed to those kids. Because if you bring in a power hitter on a full ride, and it turns out that you guessed wrong on her, and then you've got to eat that full ride that year, and you don't have any production coming for it. So that's why the money changes there a little bit. So again, that group is your kids that you might have a shortstop that's really good defensively, but can't hit it all. They can still get paid to go to school and get their school paid for at a pretty good rate, but you might not see the full ride there, and you might notice that they're going to give 30% to 2 kids that are similar versus going 60% on one kid that feels that need because they're hoping one of them pans out. The fourth group is where they really wrap up the recruiting class. And again, as we go over each one of these groups, these happen later and later. So group 1, those are the kids you see going your freshman year, like a Justice Perry to Arizona State. Your group 2 kids, those are sophomore year kids. Those are somewhere in between your sophomore and junior year. Group 3, we're really talking about getting into the junior year and being that group that has to prove a little bit more, that maybe wasn't so dominant with one tool. And now the fourth group is the kids that they really finish up the recruiting classes with and try to top off some certain things. There's 2 different types of players within this group. You can look at the players that have above average tools across the board, but don't necessarily do one thing that blows you away. And so you can bring those kids in and they contribute. And a good example about a kid like this will be Mason Garland, that's going to the University of Georgia and is committed there. She's a 2014. Mason was at our All-American games and was the defensive player of the tournament. But Mason doesn't do one single thing that just blows you away. She's the type of player that we tell coaches you have to see over and over to gain an appreciation for. So if you're that type of player, you just really have to grind it out and put yourself in positions to be seen and evaluated or cross-checked by coaches, because these are the types of players that go in for a little bit less money, and when they go in, they really have to assert themselves and be consistent, be an everyday performer. Every program needs kids like that, but this is where that group is typically recruited because they don't have that one big tool that stands out. On the other side, this is also that group where a coach can commit to a player who does one thing exceptionally well. So you might be a 2-6 runner. You might be a power hitter who can't play a lick of defense, and that's okay. Because in this group, there's still some money left at some times. This is also where we start seeing invited walk-ons take place. And so it might be a situation where you do one thing exceptionally well. But again, keep in mind, for a coach, the fewer tools that you have that are well above average, the more risk that they're assuming with the money that they give a player. Because if you're a power hitter only and you come in and hit 2 home runs, then that investment for the coach didn't work out the way they wanted it to. So don't expect a full ride if it's a one-dimensional type physical tool. And so those are the 4 different categories that we see players fall into. Again, the first one is your 5-tool kids that do everything well. And so they're more of a safe bet. There's less risk for the coach. They can recruit them early because the physical tools are so well. And a lot of these kids, physical tools, running, arm strength, power, a lot of those kids that they're recruiting as freshmen and sophomore are full-grown kids where they don't have to guess how much better that they're going to get. In the second group, we're looking for kids that have 3 to 4 really good tools. Again, this happens later than the first group because there's more risk with this group because they do have some deficiencies. Your third group are the kids that do 1 or 2 things exceptionally well and have above average tools across the board and everything else usually. A little bit more risk than the second group, and so they're paid a little bit less and they go a little bit later. Your fourth group is your kids that are really above average in all tools, but they don't have one tool that sticks out, or it's a kid that has one really good tool that really fits a school's need in that recruiting class. So that'll give you an idea about how coaches go through the process and what types of players that they're looking for as they fill up at each recruiting class. The second part of this is, as a student athlete, how are you supposed to know what they're looking for, and how do you receive that information? This is where it's a little bit more about who you know and how you contact people. As an 8th grader or 9th through 12th grader, there's different rules for how coaches can contact you. The first one you need to know about is, until you're a junior in high school, a coach can't email you back. So if you're a freshman or sophomore and you take this advice part way and you don't follow through on the second half, it's not going to help you. I encourage you to email coaches and ask them specifically what types of players they're looking for, and try to start the conversation with them that allows you to understand, are they looking for speed, pitching depth, power hitting? And then if you're qualified or have a scouting index with us, you understand exactly what types of programs and how you might be able to help someone in the future. If you're a freshman or sophomore and you ask this question through email, be advised if you're not going to get a response back. It is illegal for that coach to email you back unless it's an NAIA or junior college coach. If it's an NCAA coach, they're not allowed to email you back at that point. They have to wait till you're a junior in high school. And so you need a recruiting contact. This means you need a travel coach, a high school coach, a hitting coach, a pitching coach, someone other than yourself or mom and dad that coach can communicate with if you're a player of interest. If you're not providing them information on who to contact, if you're a player of interest, you'll never know about it. If you're a junior in high school, still provide that recruiting contact, but they can initiate the process with you through email. When you're a junior, they can email you back. If they ask you to call them, be advised that if you call and leave a message, they can't call you back. As a senior, you can receive phone calls back and you can receive email communication. And so you need to understand the rules there, because you can be a qualified athlete, but you can put yourself in a situation where they never can communicate that interest, especially if you're outside of a region that they regularly attend tournaments or different events. And so keep in mind that the rules are different for each grade, and that depending on what age you are, you have to understand the rules. And if you're younger, you have to provide the recruiting contact so that they can do this. If you'll ask the question, sometimes you can get an answer. If you're a qualified student athlete, then chances are you'll get an answer. And if we hear the word no, that's okay. If you're in the second group that can play at the Division I level and they don't need what you offer, that's fine. You move on to programs that are offering that, but you have to ask the question. If you're sending 100 emails a week to coaches and you have no idea what they're looking for, you're wasting a lot of time. So do your work, ask the question, and don't be afraid of the response, because ultimately what this comes down to is having choices on where you play college softball. And the more information that you find out from programs, the easier this process is going to be. And so don't let it be a mystery what they're looking for. Be proactive about the process, ask the question, and give them a way to respond.